been driving for a rideshare app in San Francisco for a little over a year now. At first, it was just a way to make some extra cash between gigs. But then something happened. I became obsessed with my rating, like really obsessed. I was proud of my 5-star score, and I'd go out of my way to make sure every passenger was comfortable, happy, and satisfied. That rating became a part of my identity. And if you've ever driven for one of these apps, you know how hard it is to keep that perfect 5-star rating. One wrong ride, one annoyed passenger, and it's gone forever. But I managed. I gave out water, mints, offered phone chargers, kept my car spotless, everything to make sure that each ride was perfect. It was working until I met Ben. I was parked near the ferry building at the end of a long shift, thinking about calling it a night when a ping popped up on my phone. It was a request from a guy named Ben. Just a short ride to a spot in the Mission District. Easy enough, I thought. When I pulled up to one ferry building, Ben was already there, standing by the curb. He looked, I don't know how to describe it, impatient, irritated. His arms were crossed and he was checking his phone like I was already late even though I was right on time. That should have been my first clue that something was off. Ben, I asked, leaning out the window. Yeah, he replied curtly, opening the back door and sliding in. He didn't even make eye contact, just muttered something under his breath. Where to? I asked, trying to keep my voice upbeat like I always did. Mission District. Just follow the GPS, he said, his tone flat, like he couldn't be bothered to talk to me. I shrugged it off. Not every ride was going to be chatty, and that was fine. I started the car and pulled away from the curb, heading toward his destination. It didn't take long before the first complaint came. You're driving too slow, he muttered from the back. I glanced at the speedometer. I was doing the speed limit. Sorry, I said, trying to keep things polite. Traffic's been a little heavy tonight. He didn't respond, just let out an exaggerated sigh. I could feel my grip tighten on the steering wheel. I hate when people act like you're inconveniencing them just by doing your job, but I wasn't going to let it get to me. Not yet, anyway. A few minutes passed in uncomfortable silence. The city lights blurred past us, the streets busy with late-night traffic. I was focusing on the road when Ben suddenly spoke again, this time with a sharp edge in his voice. You know, I could just give you 1 star, he said casually, like it was no big deal. That's how these things work, right? I blinked, my heart skipping a beat. He didn't sound angry, more like he was testing me. I'm sorry, I asked, my voice quieter now. Yeah, you're kind of being slow and taking some weird routes, he continued, his tone indifferent. 1 star could really hurt your rating, huh? I felt a knot form in my stomach. My rating. I'd worked so hard to keep it perfect, and here was this guy, casually threatening to destroy it. I forced a smile. I'm following the GPS. If you'd like, I can take a different route. He shrugged. Doesn't matter. But if you want to keep that perfect rating, you might want to be more accommodating. I didn't like the way he said that. It felt like a threat wrapped in polite words, but I kept my cool. I'm happy to do whatever you need, I said, though my voice felt strained. He didn't say anything for a while. I thought maybe he'd drop it, maybe he was just having a bad day and the ride would end soon enough. Then he spoke again. You could help me out with something, he said slowly. You know, if you wanna make sure I leave you 5 stars. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ben was staring out the window, his face calm, like he wasn't asking for something strange. But I could feel it. This was about to go south. What kind of help? I asked, trying to sound casual, but my heart was racing now. There's a stop I need to make, he said, leaning forward slightly. It's not far. Just a quick detour. You do that and I'll make sure your rating stays intact." I hesitated. Every part of me wanted to tell him no. But then I thought about that rating. 1 star would wreck everything I'd built. I wasn't ready to let that happen over something as small as a detour, right? "Sure," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's the stop?" Ben grinned, a slow, smug smile that made my skin crawl. "Just keep going. I'll tell you when to turn." I swallowed hard, feeling the tension in the air grow thicker. But I kept driving. We were getting closer to the Mission District when Ben told me to take a left down a narrow street. I hesitated, but did as he asked. The street was quieter, darker. I didn't like the look of it. "Here," he said suddenly. "Pull over." I stopped the car near a small, dimly lit alley. Ben didn't move right away. He just sat there for a moment, like he was waiting for something. "Wait here," he said, opening the door. "I'll be right back." Before I could ask what he was doing, he slipped out of the car and disappeared into the alley. The air felt thick with unease, and I glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of how isolated this street was. No other cars, no people, just the distant hum of the city beyond. I waited for what felt like forever, the minutes dragging on. My mind raced with possibilities. What was he doing? What had I gotten myself into? I was just about to leave, screw the rating, when Ben reappeared, slipping back into the car as if nothing had happened. He didn't say anything, just motioned for me to keep driving. I swallowed the lump in my throat and pulled away from the curb, the car eerily silent as we continued toward his destination. "Good job," he said after a few minutes, breaking the silence. "You're almost there." "Almost where?" "I thought we were just going to the Mission District." But now I wasn't sure where he was taking me. I started to feel like I'd made a huge mistake. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. Ben was smiling, but there was something off about it, something cold. "I need you to do one more thing," he said, his voice calm but firm. "After you drop me off, there's another stop. You'll get instructions once you get there." My heart pounded in my chest. "Ben, I can't keep making stops. I need to get back." "You want to keep that perfect rating, don't you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or do you want me to leave that 1 star? I gripped the steering wheel tightly. This was spiraling out of control. I'd already done more than I should have, and now I was caught between keeping my rating and something much darker. "Ben, I don't know what you're involved in, but I can't do this," I said, my voice trembling. "Please just let me finish this ride and go." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned back, shrugging casually. "Suit yourself, but I'm leaving the review when we get there." Panic surged through me. Was it worth it? Was a perfect rating worth doing something I'd regret for the rest of my life? Suddenly, my phone buzzed. I glanced down, and a notification from the rideshare app flashed across the screen. "Important compliance evaluation in progress." My blood ran cold. I realized then that this wasn't just about a rating. This was something bigger. Ben wasn't just a passenger. He was testing me. The stops, the demands. It was all part of some twisted game. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Ben's smile widened. "That's for me to know. The question is, Aisha, what kind of driver are you?" My hands shook as I pulled the car over, my mind racing. I had to make a choice. Either I gave in, continued down this dark path, or I stood my ground and risked everything. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest, and turned to face him. "I'm done," I said firmly, my voice stronger than I expected. "I don't care about the rating. I'm not doing this." For a moment, Ben just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "Good choice," he said quietly, opening the door and stepping out of the car. He paused for a moment, looking back at me with that same cold smile. "You passed." And just like that, he was gone, disappearing into the night. I sat there for a long time, the weight of the night settling over me. My phone buzzed again and I glanced down to see the notification, "Compliance test complete. Your rating will not be affected." I blinked at the screen, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. A compliance test? I had heard rumors about the rideshare company running secret tests to see how drivers handled difficult passengers, but I never thought I'd actually be part of one. My heart was still pounding as I sat there, staring out at the quiet street where Ben had disappeared. He wasn't just a random passenger. This whole thing had been orchestrated. But why? What was the point? I felt a mix of relief and anger. I'd been manipulated, pushed to the brink, all for some corporate test to see if I would break the rules. For a long moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. It was like the world had been tipped upside down, and I wasn't sure how to set it right again. The perfect rating I had obsessed over for so long suddenly felt meaningless. I had been willing to compromise my integrity for a number on a screen. Taking a deep breath, I decided I needed to get out of there to clear my head. I started the car again, pulled away from the curb and merged back onto the main road. The city lights of San Francisco seemed distant, the familiar hum of traffic now an echo in the background as I made my way back toward home. The rain had started again, soft and steady against the windshield, the kind of weather that usually made me feel calm. But tonight it only heightened my anxiety. I kept replaying the events in my head, Ben's smirks, his subtle threats, the way he controlled every moment. I had nearly crossed a line I wouldn't be able to come back from, all because of a simple star rating. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd almost let him win. As I drove, I found myself thinking about the countless other drivers out there just like me who might have faced similar tests. How many had been pushed to the point of compromise? How many had bent under the pressure? And how many more would be caught in this game, manipulated by people like Ben? Then I started to wonder, was Ben even his real name? Probably not. When I finally reached my apartment, the exhaustion of the night hit me all at once. I parked the car, my legs feeling heavy as I climbed the stairs to my small place. The familiar sounds of the city outside, the distant horns, the hum of life, felt surreal, like I was somehow removed from it all. As I stepped inside, I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and slumped into a chair. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced down at it. Another notification from the rideshare app. Reminder, your compliance test is part of an ongoing evaluation. Your results have been noted. I stared at the message, my chest tight with frustration. An ongoing evaluation? Was this going to happen again? Was I going to be tested over and over? My every move scrutinized by people I couldn't see, couldn't predict? I tossed my phone onto the table, feeling a wave of anger rise inside me. This wasn't what I had signed up for. I had started driving to make extra cash, to meet people, to feel like I was doing something productive with my time. But now it felt like I was part of some twisted experiment. I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall, the weight of the night settling heavily on my shoulders. The perfect rating that I had worked so hard to maintain now felt like a trap, a number that held too much power over me. I had been so afraid of losing it, I hadn't even realized I was losing myself. But then a thought crept in. What if I just didn't care about the rating anymore? What if I decided to drive because I wanted to, not because I was chasing a number? What if I stopped letting passengers like Ben control me with the threat of a bad review? It was a radical thought, one I hadn't allowed myself to have before. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I wasn't going to quit driving. I wasn't going to let some compliance test ruin something I had enjoyed for so long. But I was going to change how I approached it. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I checked the app out of habit and saw that my rating was still intact. Stars. But for the first time, I didn't feel that surge of pride I usually did. Instead, it just felt like a number. Nothing more, nothing less. I got ready for the day, grabbed my keys, and headed out the door. As I drove through the city, I picked up my first passenger of the day, a young woman heading to the airport. She smiled as she got into the car, and we exchanged the usual pleasantries. I drove her to her destination, chatting casually about the weather, her trip, nothing out of the ordinary. When we arrived, she thanked me, left a tip, and gave me 5 stars. But this time, when the notification popped up on my phone, I didn't feel that usual rush. I just smiled to myself, started the car, and pulled away. Because now, I knew the truth. It wasn't about the rating, it was about the ride. My name's Mike, and I've been driving for one of those rideshare apps part-time for the past 6 months. You know the deal, extra cash, flexible hours, and I get to see all parts of the city. Los Angeles is a weird place, man. It's got a pulse to it that's hard to explain. Some nights are quiet, the streets barely breathing, while others, well, some nights are like the one I'm about to tell you. It started out like any other shift. I was cruising around downtown Louisiana, waiting for the next ride to pop up. The streets were busy, typical Friday night in the city. I pulled over to grab a coffee, parked near 800 W Olympic BLVD. It's a hot spot for rides, tourists, business folks, you name it. I sipped my drink, trying to shake off the exhaustion that was already creeping in. Just as I was about to head home and call it a night, my phone buzzed. A ride request popped up, Elena. She was only a block away. I figured it'd be an easy fare. The app said she was going to a hotel nearby, so I accepted the ride, took a deep breath, and got ready for the last drive of the night. A few minutes later, I pulled up to the pickup spot. Elena was standing on the curb, dressed in a red coat that practically glowed under the streetlights. She had this confident air about her, smiling as she walked over and opened the door. "You, Mike?" she asked, her voice smooth and casual. "Yeah, that's me." "Hop in," I said, trying to match her easygoing vibe. She slid into the passenger seat, pulling the door shut behind her. The car instantly smelled of expensive perfume, flowery but not overpowering. She was one of those effortlessly charming types, the kind that made you want to keep the conversation going just to hear them talk. We exchanged the usual small talk as I pulled away from the curb, merging into the traffic. "So, you're heading to a hotel, huh?" I asked, more to fill the silence than anything else. "Yeah, just visiting some friends," she replied, glancing out the window. We fell into a comfortable silence as we cruised through the city streets. The traffic was slow, but nothing out of the ordinary. I was just getting into the rhythm of the drive when I pulled up to a red light. That's when things took a sharp turn into nightmare territory. I remember sitting there, waiting for the light to change, when I saw someone out of the corner of my eye. It was a guy, walking fast down the sidewalk, his hood pulled up over his head. At first, I didn't think much of it. People walk all over the Pluisiones in LA, especially downtown. But then, without any warning, he veered toward my car. And before I knew it, he yanked open the backseat door and jumped in. I froze. My mind went blank for a second. I glanced at Elena, and her eyes were wide with shock, a hand halfway to her phone. "Drive," the guy said, his voice low and rough. He was in his mid-30s, maybe, with a scruffy beard and eyes that darted around nervously. He had something in his hand, but it was too dark to tell what it was. I could feel the weight of his presence immediately. This wasn't some random dude catching a ride. "What?" I stammered, gripping the steering wheel tight. "You heard me? Drive! Now!" His tone was hard, threatening, like there was no room for argument. I glanced at Elena again, but she didn't say anything. She just sat there, her face pale. I didn't know what to do. Everything in my body told me to just floor it, get the hell out of there. But I was stuck, frozen by fear and confusion. I can't just drive. "This isn't your ride," I said, my voice shaky. The guy leaned forward, and that's when I saw it. A gun, not in his hand, but sticking out of his jacket pocket. My heart jumped into my throat. "I said drive," he repeated, his voice even lower, "or this is gonna get ugly." That's when Elena finally spoke up. "Mike, just do what he says. It's okay, just drive." Her voice was calm, too calm, and that only freaked me out more. With no other choice, I put the car into drive and started moving. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady. The guy in the back leaned back, keeping one hand on the edge of his jacket where the gun was. I could feel his eyes on me, drilling into the back of my head. "What do you want, man?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though it was breaking. The guy didn't answer right away. He just stared out the window, tapping his foot against the floorboard like he was trying to make a decision. "She's not who you think she is," he said finally, his voice low and filled with menace. I glanced at Elena, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you talking about?" The guy chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "She's my captive. I've been looking for her for a long time. She's not going to that hotel, she's running." I looked at Elena, my mind spinning. She didn't look scared, but her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open like she was trying to process what he was saying. "Mike, don't listen to him. He's crazy," she said quickly, her voice higher now, more frantic. I didn't know who to believe. My brain was screaming at me that this didn't make sense. None of it did. But the gun was real. I couldn't afford to figure it all out right now. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "Keep driving. Take the next left," the guy ordered, his voice cold and precise. I followed his directions, taking a left at the next intersection, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, hoping to catch the attention of another driver or maybe a cop. But the streets were quiet now. The further we drove, the darker and emptier the city seemed to become. I could barely hear the sound of my own breathing over the pounding in my ears. "Mike, don't listen to him," Elena whispered, her voice shaky now. "Please, you have to trust me, he's dangerous." I didn't know what to think. Every fiber of my being wanted to trust her. She seemed so sincere, so scared, but the man in the back seat wasn't exactly someone I could ignore. The gun, the way he talked, it all felt too real. "Just let her go, man, you don't have to do this," I pleaded, my voice desperate. The man laughed again, that cold, hollow laugh that sent chills down my spine. "She's already gone. You have no idea what she's done." We continued driving through the streets of Louisiana, twisting and turning down side roads and alleyways I didn't recognize. The whole time, my brain was scrambling for a plan. I couldn't just keep driving around with this guy and Elena. I didn't know what to believe. I couldn't trust either of them at this point. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, we pulled into a large parking garage. It was one of those massive structures, the kind that could swallow 1,000 cars, all packed into tight little rows. The stranger in the back seat had been quiet for most of the drive, just giving directions now and then. But now, as we entered the garage, his mood seemed to shift. "Park over there," he said, pointing toward a dark corner near the far end of the garage. I did as he asked, pulling into the spot and killing the engine. The air inside the car was heavy, thick with tension. "This is it," the man said, his voice barely a whisper now. It's time. Time for what? I didn't dare ask. Suddenly, Elena moved. Quick as lightning, she reached into her purse, pulling out something small and metallic, a knife. My heart skipped a beat as I watched her lunge toward the man in the back seat, slashing at him with the blade. You thought you could take me, she screamed, her voice wild and feral. The man reacted fast, grabbing her wrist and twisting it until she dropped the knife. I was frozen in shock, unable to process what was happening. They struggled in the back seat, grunting and cursing, until finally the man pinned Elena against the door. Mike, drive! Elena screamed, but I couldn't move. My hands were glued to the steering wheel, my brain unable to make sense of the chaos unfolding in front of me. The man pulled Elena out of the car, dragging her onto the cold concrete floor of the garage. She kicked and screamed, but he was stronger, his hands gripping her like a vice. Help me, she screamed, her voice echoing through the empty garage. I was shaking, my whole body trembling as I watched them struggle. I should have done something. I should have helped her, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed by fear, by confusion. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The man let go of Elena, standing over her with a look of cold satisfaction on his face. She scrambled to her feet, clutching her wrist where he'd twisted it. She looked over at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else I couldn't quite place. Was it anger? Desperation? I wasn't sure anymore. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel, frozen in place. Mike, do something! She shouted, her voice hoarse and panicked. But I didn't move. My brain was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, unable to make sense of what was happening. Should I get out and help her? Should I run? I didn't know who to trust anymore. The man in the back seat, the one who forced his way into the car, he was dangerous. But now I was starting to see something in Elena's behavior that made me second-guess everything. The man was panting now, standing a few feet away from her, watching her like a predator watching its prey. His face twisted into a cruel smirk as he slowly approached her again. You thought you could keep running, didn't you? He said, his voice dripping with malice. But you can't escape from this. Elena's face paled, her eyes darting between me and the man. Mike, listen to me, you don't understand. He's trying to. But before she could finish her sentence, the man cut her off. No more lies, Elena. It's over. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know what was really going on. Wait, just stop! I shouted, finally finding my voice. Both of them turned to look at me, their faces tense, waiting for my next move. Someone tell me, what the hell is going on? Who are you really? And why are we here? Elena opened her mouth to speak, but the man raised his hand, stopping her. You want to know the truth, Mike? You've been played, man. She's not some innocent passenger trying to get to a hotel. This whole thing, it's a setup. She's been using drivers like you for months now. I blinked, my brain struggling to catch up with what he was saying. What are you talking about? The man took a step toward the car, his eyes locked on mine. Elena and we've been running a little scheme. She gets in the car, plays the sweet, unsuspecting passenger, and then I show up. We create a scene, scare the driver, make them think something terrible's happening, and then we take the car, we take the cash, we take whatever we can. You're just another mark, Mike. I stared at him in disbelief, my stomach churning with a mix of fear and anger. Elena? She was part of this? My mind flashed back to how calm she had been when the stranger first got into the car, how quickly she had adjusted to the situation. It all started to make sense now, but I didn't want to believe it. No, I muttered, shaking my head. No, this can't be real. It's real, Mike, the man said, his voice low and cold. She's been playing you from the start. Elena's face twisted with anger. Shut up, Greg. You don't know what you're talking about. Greg. That was his name. I finally had something to call him other than the guy in the back seat. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was that I was caught in the middle of something I didn't fully understand, and I had no idea how to get out of it. Mike, don't listen to him, Elena pleaded, stepping closer to me. He's trying to turn you against me. You have to believe me. I looked between the two of them, my mind racing. I didn't know who to trust, but I had to make a decision fast. The parking garage was silent except for the distant hum of traffic outside. My breath was shallow, and the weight of the situation was crashing down on me. Greg sighed, stepping closer to Elena. It's over, Elena. You're not getting out of this one. She spun around, her eyes filled with fury. You think I'm going down alone, Greg? You're just as deep in this as I am. Suddenly she lunged at him, grabbing his arm and twisting it with surprising strength. Greg grunted in pain as she forced him to the ground. The knife she had dropped earlier slid across the concrete floor, and without thinking, I stepped forward, kicking it away before either of them could grab it. Stop! I shouted again, my voice breaking. This has to end, now! Elena and Greg both froze, staring at me with a mix of surprise and something else, maybe fear. For the first time that night, I felt like I had some control over the situation, but I had no idea what to do with it. Mike, please, Elena said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. You have to trust me. He's the one who's been controlling this whole thing. He's dangerous. If you let him walk away, you'll be in danger too. Greg scoffed, wiping the blood from his lip where she had struck him. She's lying, Mike. I've been trying to take her down for months. She's the real danger here. If you help her, you're done. My head was spinning. 2 stories. 2 completely different accounts of what had happened, and I didn't know who was telling the truth. Just tell me the truth, I demanded, my voice shaking. Elena stepped forward, her eyes locking onto mine. I promise you, Mike, he's been manipulating me. I never wanted to be part of this, but he forced me. He's been controlling everything, threatening me. Please, I need your help. Greg stood up slowly, dusting himself off. She's good, isn't she? Makes you want to believe her, doesn't she? But she's been lying since the moment she got in your car. I stood there, frozen, trying to piece everything together. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I could barely hear myself think. I wanted to believe Elena. I really did. But the way she had acted, the way she had fought Greg, it didn't add up. And then it hit me. The knife. The way she had pulled it out so quickly, so decisively. That wasn't the action of someone who was scared or being manipulated. That was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Elena, I said, my voice quiet but firm, you need to stop. Her face changed just for a moment. The innocent, pleading expression slipped, replaced by something harder, more calculating. I don't know what you're talking about, Mike, she said, her voice still smooth, but now with an edge to it. I shook my head, stepping back toward the car. You and Greg, you've been working together this whole time, haven't you? She didn't answer right away, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. Greg laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. Took you long enough to figure it out. Elena's face hardened. Shut up, Greg. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I backed toward the driver's seat. I needed to get out of there, away from both of them. I had been played, manipulated into their sick little game, and I wasn't going to let it go any further. I'm done, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I'm not getting involved in this. I turned, yanking open the driver's door and sliding into the seat. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, trying to get the engine started. But before I could turn the ignition, Elena was at my window, her face twisted with desperation. "Mike, wait! Don't leave me here with him!" But I wasn't listening anymore. I started the car, my heart pounding in my chest as I shifted into gear. Elena pounded on the window, her voice rising in panic, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I slammed my foot on the gas and peeled out of the parking garage, leaving them both behind. As I drove through the empty streets of LA, my mind was racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. I had been caught in the middle of something dark and twisted, something I never wanted to be a part of. I didn't know what happened to Elena and Greg after that. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I had narrowly escaped, and that was enough for me. But I'll never forget that night. The night I picked up a passenger and found myself in the middle of a nightmare. And every time I drive through downtown Louisiana, I can't help but wonder if they're still out there, running their scam, waiting for their next victim. It was a typical sticky, humid night in New Orleans. You know, the kind where the air feels so thick you can practically chew it. I had been driving for hours, one ride after another, trying to make the most of the late-night surge. The tourists were pouring out of the bars along Bourbon Street, drunk and happy, making my job both easier and harder at the same time. Easier because rides were plentiful, harder because drunk passengers aren't exactly the most cooperative. I was getting ready to call it a night when I got one last ping 600 Decatur Street right in front of Jackson Square. Not too far from where I was, so I figured, why not? Might as well take one last ride before heading home. When I pulled up, there was a young woman standing by the curb. She was wearing a simple dress, her dark hair falling over her shoulders in waves, and she looked, well, tired. The kind of tired that isn't just from lack of sleep, but something deeper. It was like she was carrying some weight with her. She gave me a small smile, barely lifting her eyes from the ground, and got into the back seat without saying a word. "Hi, I'm Marcus," I said, trying to break the ice. I always do that, introduce myself to make the ride a little less awkward. "Emily," she replied, her voice soft, almost too quiet to hear over the sound of the car engine. "Where are we headed, Emily?" I asked, glancing at the rearview mirror. "Just keep driving," she mumbled, her head already resting against the window. I should have questioned it. Normally, I don't start driving until I know the exact destination, but something about the way she said it made me hesitate. It was like she was exhausted beyond words, and honestly, I was too tired to argue. I figured she'd tell me where she wanted to go once she gathered her thoughts. So I pulled away from Jackson Square and started driving through the streets of New Orleans, the old brick buildings and iron balconies slipping by as the city began to quiet down for the night. The lights from the French Quarter cast long shadows on the road, and the humid air pressed against the windows. After a few minutes, I glanced back at Emily. Her eyes were closed, her breathing slow and steady. She was asleep. I wasn't sure what to do. It wasn't the first time a passenger had fallen asleep during a ride, but something about this felt different. She seemed distant, almost like she was somewhere else entirely. But hey, people get drunk, they get tired, it happens. I figured I'd let her rest for a bit, then gently wake her up once we got closer to wherever she wanted to go. I kept driving for a while longer, trying to shake the creeping fatigue that was settling over me. The streets were mostly empty now. Just the occasional late-night wanderer or a couple, stumbling out of a bar. The city felt quieter than usual, the kind of eerie calm that only happens after midnight in a place like New Orleans. That's when I heard it, the softest rustling sound coming from the back seat. At first, I thought maybe Emily was stirring in her sleep, but when I glanced back, she hadn't moved. She was still slumped against the window, completely still. But the sound continued, like something shifting in the back seat, just out of sight. My heart skipped a beat. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a plastic bag caught in the wind or something moving under the seat. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, a chill crept down my spine. "Emily?" I said, my voice wavering slightly. No response. She didn't move, didn't even twitch. I slowed the car down, pulling over to the side of the road. Something wasn't right. My mind was racing now, 1,000 possibilities flashing through my head. Maybe she was sick, or worse. I needed to check on her. I turned off the engine and glanced back again, my pulse quickening. Emily was still in the same position, her head resting against the window. Her face was peaceful, almost too peaceful. I called her name again, louder this time, but she didn't respond. I reached over and gently shook her shoulder. "Emily?" Nothing. Panic started to claw its way into my chest. I shook her harder, and that's when I realized her skin was cold. Not freezing, but definitely not the warmth you'd expect from someone sitting in a car for that long. I sat there for a moment, paralyzed by the fear that something terrible had happened. Had she overdosed? Passed out from exhaustion? My mind was racing with scenarios, none of them good. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and started dialing when something stopped me. A sound, a faint, muffled voice from behind me. Marcus. My blood turned to ice. I whipped around, expecting to see Emily awake, but she was still slumped over, completely still. The voice, though, it had come from the back seat. From her. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was hearing things. Maybe the long shift and exhaustion were messing with my head. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Help me." The voice was faint, almost like a whisper, but it was definitely her. I leaned closer, my heart racing in my chest. "Emily, are you okay?" Her eyes didn't open, her body didn't move, but her lips, they moved ever so slightly, forming words that chilled me to the bone. "Help me, before he finds Memi." I recoiled, nearly dropping my phone. This wasn't just some ordinary passenger falling asleep. Something was deeply, terribly wrong here. My instincts screamed at me to call for help, but I hesitated. I couldn't explain it. How could I tell anyone that I was hearing voices from a passenger who was clearly unconscious? My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't just leave her like this, but I also couldn't ignore the growing dread in my gut. Before I could make a decision, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Detective Landry. The name sent a jolt of confusion through me. I didn't know any Detective Landry, but the call ID was legit. It wasn't a scam or a random number. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a mistake, but something told me to answer. I swiped the screen and put the phone to my ear. "Is this Marcus?" The voice on the other end asked, deep and authoritative. "Yeah, who's asking?" I replied, my voice shaking. "This is Detective Landry with the New Orleans Police Department," the voice said. "We need to talk." "Are you with a woman named Emily?" My heart pounded in my chest. "Yeah, she's in the car with me, but something's wrong. I think she's unconscious and she—" "Listen to me very carefully, Marcus," Detective Landry interrupted, his tone sharp. "Do not, under any circumstances, let her out of your sight. Stay where you are and don't move." "What? What's going on? Is she in danger?" "I'll explain everything when I get there. Just keep her in the car." "I'm on my way." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what to think anymore. Emily was unconscious, or at least I thought she was, but she was whispering things that didn't make sense. And now a detective was involved? What the hell had I gotten myself into? Minutes felt like hours as I sat there, waiting. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound the occasional car passing in the distance. I kept glancing back at Emily, expecting her to wake up at any moment, but she remained still, her breathing shallow. Then, just as the tension became unbearable, a car pulled up behind mine. The door opened, and a man in a trench coat stepped out, his face illuminated by the streetlight. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, dark circles under his eyes, his jaw clenched tightly. Detective Landry. He approached the car, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at Emily through the window. Without saying a word, he opened the back door and leaned in, checking her pulse. I held my breath, waiting for him to say something. "She's still alive," he muttered, mostly to himself. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. What the hell is going on? She's been like this for almost an hour, and she was whispering things like asking for help. Detective Landry straightened up, his face grim. "Emily is a sleepwalker, Marcus, but not just any sleepwalker. She has a rare condition called complex nocturnal dissociation." Complex. What? I asked, completely lost. "It's a sleep disorder where people can perform complex actions while they're asleep. In her case, she goes on long walks, gets into cars, and sometimes even disappears for days." My mind was spinning. "So you're saying she's been asleep this whole time?" Landry nodded. "Yes, but it's more than that. She's been part of an ongoing investigation. There have been a series of disappearances around New Orleans, and we believe Emily's condition might be connected." "Connected how?" I asked, feeling a growing sense of dread. "Emily isn't aware of what she's doing, but when she sleepwalks, she follows a very specific route, a route that leads her to the same places where people have gone missing." My blood ran cold. "You think she's involved in those disappearances?" "We don't know yet," Landry admitted, "but we've been tracking her movements, trying to figure out why these disappearances coincide with her sleepwalking episodes." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The quiet, exhausted woman in my back seat was at the center of a police investigation, and I had been caught right in the middle of it. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Landry looked at me, his expression serious. "You stay with her, keep her safe, and don't let her out of your sight." The rest of that night was a blur. We waited for Emily to wake up, and when she finally did, she had no memory of what had happened. No recollection of getting into my car, of the whispers, or of the detective's arrival. Detective Landry took her into custody for questioning, though it wasn't an arrest. "Just precautionary measures," he said. "I still drive for the rideshare app, but I've never taken a ride as strange as that one. Some nights when I'm driving through the empty streets of New Orleans, I think about Emily and the mystery surrounding her sleepwalking. And I wonder, is she still out there, walking through the night, unaware of the secrets she's keeping?" The days following that night felt like a fog. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unfinished, lingering just beyond reach. Every time I got into the car, I thought about Emily, how she had been so still, so silent, yet somehow at the center of something far bigger than either of us realized. Detective Landry hadn't given me much information before he left that night. After taking Emily into custody for questioning, he told me I wouldn't be needed again. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to push it out of my mind and go back to normal. I kept driving, taking late-night fares through the familiar streets of New Orleans, picking up the usual mix of tourists, locals and partiers making their way home. But every now and then I'd find myself driving past Jackson Square. the place where I'd picked Emily up that night. I'd catch myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her face staring back at me. A few weeks passed, and I heard nothing more about the investigation. Part of me was relieved. Whatever had happened with Emily, it wasn't my problem anymore. But another part of me couldn't let it go. I had too many questions and too few answers. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I found myself parked by the river, staring at my phone. I was scrolling through news articles, searching for anything related to Emily or the disappearances Detective Landry had mentioned. But there was nothing. No reports of missing people, no updates on the case, just the usual crime stories and weather reports. I was about to give up when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Meet me at 800 Bourbon Street. We need to talk. Landry." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from the detective since that night, and now, out of the blue, he was reaching out. My mind raced with possibilities. Why now? Why Bourbon Street? Without thinking, I started the car and headed toward the address. The closer I got to the French Quarter, the heavier the weight in my chest grew. Something told me this wasn't just a casual follow-up. Whatever it was, it felt important. Bourbon Street was alive with the usual chaos, music pouring from the bars, people laughing and stumbling along the sidewalks, neon lights casting an eerie glow over everything. I parked a block away and walked toward the address Landry had given me, weaving through the crowd. When I reached the spot, I saw Landry standing near the entrance of a small bar, his trench coat blending into the shadows. He looked different than I remembered, more worn, more tired. Dark circles framed his eyes, and his expression was grim. "Marcus," he greeted me with a nod as I approached. "Thanks for coming." "What's this about?" he asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is it about Emily?" Landry nodded, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I can't give you all the details, but we've uncovered something, and I think you deserve to know, considering you were part of it." I leaned in, my heart racing. "What did you find?" He sighed, rubbing his temples before answering. "Emily, she wasn't just a sleepwalker. Her condition, complex nocturnal dissociation, it was more severe than we initially thought. When she sleepwalks, she enters a kind of fugue state. She can do things, perform tasks, and move through the city without any conscious memory of it. But it goes deeper than that." Landry paused, his eyes narrowing. "We've been tracking her movements, using security footage and witness reports. Every time she sleepwalks, she follows the same route, always leading to places where people have gone missing." A chill ran down my spine. "So she's involved in the disappearances?" Landry shook his head. "Not directly. At least we don't think so. But here's the strange part. Whenever she reaches one of those locations, she seems to wait. Like she's waiting for something or someone." I frowned, trying to make sense of it, but she doesn't remember any of it. "No," Landry replied. "She has no memory of anything that happens while she's sleepwalking. And that's what makes this so difficult. We don't know if she's being controlled, if there's some outside influence, or if it's something else entirely." I felt my stomach drop. "What are you saying? That someone's using her? Like she's part of a bigger P-plan?" Landry didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. "We've been investigating a string of disappearances around New Orleans for years. People vanish without a trace, no bodies, no evidence, nothing. It's like they're just gone. And every time, Emily's sleepwalking episodes seem to coincide with those disappearances." I shook my head, trying to process what he was telling me. "So what does that mean? Is she dangerous?" Landry hesitated. "We don't know, But we do know that someone or something is using her, and we need to find out who before more people go missing. The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd been part of this from the beginning without even realizing it. That night with Emily, it wasn't just a random ride. It was part of something much bigger, something far more sinister. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Landry looked me in the eye, his expression deadly serious. "Because I need your help, Marcus. You were the last person to see her before we took her into custody. You might have noticed something, anything, that could help us figure out what's going on." I thought back to that night, the eerie calm, the whispers, the way Emily had seemed so out of place, yet so connected to something deeper. But nothing stood out. Nothing made sense. "I don't know what to tell you," I admitted. "She was just asleep, but she whispered something. She said, 'Help me before he finds me.' I thought it was just part of her dreaming." Landry's eyes widened slightly. "She said Tat?" "Yeah." "Why? Does it mean something?" He didn't answer right away, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. "We need to look into this more," he muttered almost to himself. "This might be the lead we've been missing." Before I could ask any more questions, Landry straightened up, his posture tense. "Look, Marcus, I know this is a lot to take in, but I need you to stay alert. If you hear from her again or if anything else strange happens, you need to contact me immediately." I nodded, though my mind was still racing. "What are you going to do now?" "We're going to keep digging," Landry replied, his voice low. "There's something happening in this city, something connected to Emily, and we need to figure out what it is before more people disappear." With that, he gave me a firm nod and walked away, disappearing into the crowd on Bourbon Street, leaving me standing there in the humid night, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Emily, the disappearances, the strange coincidence of it all, it felt like I had stepped into something far beyond my understanding. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over, and somehow I was right in the middle of it. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I kept thinking about what Landry had said about Emily and the disappearances. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching, waiting. Every time I got behind the wheel, I found myself glancing into the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see Emily sitting in the back seat again. And then, late one night, as I was driving home from another shift, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "He's coming for me, help me, Emily." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. This wasn't over. Not even close. I guess I should start by saying I've always been a tech guy. Working in Silicon Valley, it's almost a requirement. I graduated from Stanford with a degree in software engineering and landed a decent job at a startup. But in the Valley, even with a tech job, the rent eats you alive. So a couple of years ago, I started driving for one of those rideshare apps on the side. Easy cash, flexible hours, and a chance to clear my head while cruising around Cupertino. What could go wrong, right? It was a regular Thursday night when it all started. I'd been at the office all day working on a new piece of code that was giving me hell. My mind was fried, and I figured doing a few rides would help clear the fog. I fired up the app, got a ping almost instantly, and headed out. The first ride was uneventful. A woman heading to a business meeting at one of those tech campuses on Sand Hill Road. We made small talk about the industry, the kind of stuff you hear all the time out here. I dropped her off, gave her 5 stars, and moved on to the next ride. That's when things got weird. I had parked near One Infinite Loop, right in the heart of Cupertino, grabbing a coffee while I waited for my next ride request. The notification popped up on my phone, and I glanced at it without thinking. Just another ride, I figured. But the address was strange. It wasn't even a real address, just a series of numbers and letters that didn't make any sense. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. Apps screw up sometimes, and this wasn't the first time I'd seen something odd. But when I tapped the request, the map loaded and the pin dropped in what looked like a normal part of town just a few blocks away. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just a bug. I accepted the ride and headed toward the location. When I arrived, there was nobody waiting. No passenger, no car nearby, nothing. I sat there for a minute, looking around, feeling that creeping unease that comes when something doesn't quite add up. I tried calling the passenger, but the call didn't connect, just silence on the other end. Frustrated, I decided to cancel the ride and move on. But when I opened the app to cancel, the option wasn't there. No cancel ride button, no contact support button, just the map with my location. My phone buzzed again and another notification popped up. Please continue to your next destination. What the hell? I muttered under my breath. I thought about just shutting off the app, but for some reason, I didn't. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I was too tired to argue with the piece of software. Either way, I followed the prompt, driving toward the next location on the map. This one was a little further out, but I figured I'd take one last ride before calling it a night. The next spot was strange too. A small park on the edge of town, completely empty. Not a single person in sight. Again, I tried calling the passenger. Again, nothing. My phone buzzed again. Another message, please wait. Passenger is approaching. I looked around, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The park was pitch black, the streetlights too far apart to offer any real comfort. My heart started to race. I don't scare easily, but something about the silence, the isolation, just didn't sit right. A minute passed, then two. I kept glancing around, waiting for someone to appear, but nobody came. Finally, I decided I'd had enough. I opened the app, ready to shut it down, but this time the entire screen went black. Just blank. No map, no buttons, nothing. I swore under my breath and restarted my phone, figuring it was just a bug. But when the phone came back to life, the app opened on its own. And this time, the map showed a new location, far outside Cupertino, near the foothills. I should have quit then. I should have driven home, uninstalled the app, and never looked back. But something about the whole thing drew me in. It didn't make sense. And as a software engineer, I couldn't walk away without figuring out what was going on. I decided to go for it. One last stop, and then I'd be done for the night. The drive was long, winding through dark, deserted streets and into the more rural outskirts of Silicon Valley. My GPS showed the pin dropping somewhere near Stevens Canyon Road, a place I'd been to a few times for hiking, but never at night. When I finally arrived, there was nothing there. No houses, no buildings, just an abandoned service road leading into the woods. My headlights illuminated the cracked pavement and overgrown bushes, casting long shadows that danced in the beams of light. The app buzzed again. This time the message was different. Do not exit the vehicle. Wait for further instructions. A chill ran down my spine. I looked around, half expecting someone to appear from the trees, but there was nothing. I locked the doors, my pulse quickening as I waited for whatever was supposed to happen next. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I checked the time, 11:45 p.m. Too late for this kind of bullshit. Just as I was about to turn the car around and leave, a figure appeared in the distance. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then the figure moved closer, slowly, deliberately. My heart raced as I watched them approach, a silhouette barely visible in the dim light. "Who the hell is this?" I whispered to myself, my hand hovering over the gear shift, ready to floor it if things got any weirder. The figure stopped about 20 feet from the car, standing still as a statue. I squinted, trying to make out any details, but it was too dark. My phone buzzed again. Another message. "Passenger has arrived. Please wait." I didn't move. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't waiting for this person to get in my car. No way. But before I could do anything, my phone rang. It wasn't a normal ring, though. It was some distorted, garbled sound that made my skin crawl. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking. The voice on the other end was soft, almost a whisper. "You need to finish the ride, Alex. It's not safe to leave." "How do you know my name?" I demanded, my fear now replaced with anger. "Who the hell is this?" "You've been selected," the voice continued, ignoring my questions. "You have one more stop. Don't turn around." The call disconnected before I could respond. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just a glitch. Something was seriously wrong here. I put the car in reverse, ready to get the hell out of there. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, another figure stood behind the car, blocking the exit. This one was closer, and I could see their face, expressionless, pale, and watching me with cold, empty eyes. My breath caught in my throat as I realized there was no way out. I shifted back into drive, my mind racing. The only way forward was down the service road into the darkness. I didn't want to go, but what choice did I have? The app had trapped me here, and now I was stuck playing along with whatever sick game this was. As I drove deeper into the woods, the figure from before followed, walking at an unnervingly slow pace, like they had all the time in the world. My headlights barely cut through the thick fog that had settled over the road, and I felt like I was driving into a nightmare. The app buzzed again. This time the message was simple: arriving at your destination in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. That's all it would take to reach wherever I was headed. The road narrowed, the trees closing in on both sides. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced at the screen. Another notification: final stop, complete the ride to unlock the truth. I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't care. I just wanted this to be over. When I reached the end of the road, the car came to a stop in front of a small, run-down cabin, barely visible through the fog. The windows were boarded up, and the front door hung loosely on its hinges. This place hadn't been lived in for years. My phone buzzed one last time. The message sent a chill down my spine. "Passenger has arrived. Please exit the vehicle." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. I didn't want to get out. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, to turn the car around and never look back. But I couldn't. Something had control of me, whether it was the app or something else I didn't know. With a deep breath, I unlocked the door and stepped out into the cold night air. The figure that had followed me stood just a few feet away now, watching silently as I approached the cabin. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a dark, empty interior. The smell of mildew and rot hit me like a wall, but I forced myself to keep moving. The figure stood at the entrance, not following me inside, just watching, its eyes unblinking in the pale moonlight. I stepped into the cabin, my heart hammering in my chest. The air was thick and cold, like the place hadn't seen a living soul in years. The inside of the cabin was bare, just an old, broken-down table in the center of the room and some dust-covered shelves along the walls. It was eerily silent, save for the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet. My phone buzzed in my pocket again, and with trembling hands I pulled it out. The app had opened itself once more, displaying a single message: check the table. I swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in my throat. My breath came in short, shallow bursts as I slowly approached the table. There, lying on the dusty surface, was an old, beat-up smartphone. Its screen was cracked, and the battery indicator blinked red like it was barely hanging on to life. I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the better of me. I reached out, picked it up, and turned it on. The phone buzzed in my hand, the screen flickering to life. The app was already open, just like on my own phone, and a message appeared: passenger log available. Review now! I stared at the screen, my fingers shaking. Part of me didn't want to know what was going on, but I couldn't leave without understanding the full scope of this nightmare. I tapped on the message. The screen shifted, and a list of rides appeared, ride logs dating back years. The names of passengers, locations, and drop-off points flashed before my eyes, but something was wrong. The locations. They weren't normal addresses, they were abandoned places, service roads, empty lots, places where no one should be going. I scrolled further, dread building in my stomach. Then I saw it, my name. Driver, Alex. Pickup localification, 1 Infinite Loop, Cupertino, CA. Drop-off location, Stevens, Californian Road, Cupertino, CA. Status, en route. It was my ride, the one I was on right now. But below it, another log appeared, one that hadn't happened yet. Driver, Alex. Final drop-off, redacted. Status, awaiting completion. I stared at the screen, my mind spinning. This wasn't a glitch. This was a setup. Somehow the app knew exactly where I was going before I even got there. But why? Before I could make sense of it, the cabin door creaked open behind me. I spun around, my heart nearly stopping. The figure from outside was now standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the moonlight. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching me. I took a step back, my legs trembling. "What? What do you want from me?" he stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure took a slow step forward, and for the first time, I could see its face, if you could even call it that. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were dark voids, hollow and lifeless. My breath caught in my throat as it reached out a hand toward me. I stumbled back, crashing into the table behind me. The phone slipped from my grasp, hitting the floor with a soft thud. I didn't dare take my eyes off the figure as it continued its slow, deliberate approach. My phone buzzed again, and despite my fear, I couldn't help but glance down at the screen. A new message had appeared: "You have one more stop to make, Alex. Complete the ride." I didn't know what that meant, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I bolted for the door, pushing past the figure as I ran outside into the cold night air. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted toward my car, fumbling with the keys. I could hear footsteps behind me, slow, heavy, unhurried. It was following me. I managed to unlock the car door and threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition and started the engine. The headlights flickered on, illuminating the empty service road ahead of me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the figure right behind me, but there was nothing. The road was empty. I didn't waste any time. I floored the gas, speeding down the narrow road, away from the cabin, away from whatever had been inside. My breath came in ragged gasps, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. I hesitated, but something inside me told me to answer it. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice barely steady. The voice on the other end was calm, almost soothing. "You're almost there, Alex. Just one more stop." I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop in the middle of the road. "What the hell is this?" I shouted into the phone. "Who are you?" The voice didn't answer my question. Instead, it gave me an address I recognize. 330 Ellis Street, San Francisco. I knew that place. It was an old warehouse in the Tenderloin district, a place that had been shut down years ago after a police raid. I hadn't been there in years, but I'd heard rumors about illegal activity, about things happening there that no one wanted to talk about. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why do you want me to go there?" The voice paused for a moment, then spoke in a tone that sent chills down my spine. "Because, Alex, you've been chosen." The call disconnected, leaving me in silence. I sat there for a moment, my mind reeling. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to drive home, to pretend this whole night had never happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that no matter where I went, I wouldn't be able to escape. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't have a choice. I had to see this through. With a heavy heart, I put the car in gear and headed toward San Francisco. The drive was long, and the city lights blurred past me as I sped down the highway. By the time I reached the Tenderloin, it was well past midnight. The streets were dark and empty, the kind of place you didn't want to be alone at this hour. I pulled up in front of the warehouse, my headlights casting long shadows across the boarded-up windows. The place looked abandoned, but I knew better. Something was happening here, something I wasn't supposed to know about. My phone buzzed again, another message. "Enter the warehouse. Complete the ride." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, to drive away and never look back. But I couldn't. I had come too far. I stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin as I approached the warehouse. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of dust and decay. As I walked deeper into the building, my footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a new message. "You've arrived at your final destination. The truth awaits." I didn't know what that meant, but I kept moving. I reached the back of the warehouse where a single light flickered overhead. There, in the center of the room, was a large wooden crate, its surface covered in dust. My phone buzzed one last time. The message was short, simple. "Open it." I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. But I had come too far to turn back now. I reached out, my hand trembling as I pried open the crate. Inside there was nothing, just an empty dark void that seemed to stretch on forever. I stared into the darkness, my mind racing. I didn't understand. What was this? What was the point of all this? And then, without warning, something reached out from the darkness. Cold, clammy hands grabbed hold of me, pulling me into the void. I screamed, struggling to break free, but it was no use. The darkness swallowed me whole. I don't know how long I was out. When I finally came to, I was lying on the floor of the warehouse, my phone buzzing next to me. My head throbbed, and my vision was blurry. I struggled to sit up, my body aching as I reached for the phone. The app was still open, displaying a single message, "Ride complete. Thank you for your service." I stared at the screen, my mind blank. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure.